Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
My colleague here at LBC, former Mayor of London, Ken Livingstone, has just been appointed the co-chair of Labour's Defence Review. This, of course, will include formulating new policy on the Trident nuclear deterrent, and he joins me on the line now. Ken, we should start with the most important question. Will this affect your Saturday morning LBC show with David Mellor?
No, they won't allow me to use nuclear weapons to take out the LBC studio, I'm afraid.
Well, we should probably be thankful for that. On a more serious note, you've been back in the front line for 10 minutes and you've already caused some controversy. The former Defence Minister, Kevin Jones, has questioned your qualifications to do the job, and you've reacted by suggesting that he might need some psychiatric help. Unfortunate, because, of course, he has spoken publicly of his suffering from clinical depression.
Yeah. I had no idea he even existed until I got this abusive call. And it just strikes me that if you're on Labour's benches in the House of Commons, the objective is to get rid of this government and elect Jeremy Corbyn. And you don't do that by undermining Jeremy Corbyn and his decisions. And I mean, for all my disagreements...
Ken, I'm just struggling with the phone. I'm struggling with the phone line a bit, Ken. I don't know if you've sort of come down a ladder or something, whether we can do anything to improve it at all so that everybody can hear clearly what you're actually saying. Let's just try and call Ken back so that we can get a better quality phone line, and I'll give you the background, actually, shall I, while we're doing that. The Shadow Defence Minister who suffered from depression was, we'll find out here he is. So, Ken, carry on.
Well, basically, it's completely unacceptable for a Labour MP to carry on undermining Jeremy Corbyn. I mean, the Labour's National Executive Committee appoints two people to chair these policy reviews, one from the Shadow Cabinet, one from the NEC. And frankly, if you look back, most people accept my record of administration.
I'll get onto that in a moment, but I thought you might be a little more contrite about suggesting that a man who's spoken publicly of his struggle with mental illness, diagnosed mental illness, should pop off and see his GP before he makes these offensive comments.
Well, he shouldn't have made these offensive comments.
But nor should you, Ken, surely.
If someone's rude to me, they usually get me being rude back, and they have to get used to that. You can't sit on Labour benches in the House of Commons, undermine the leader who's just been elected by the party, and not expect to be told where he should go.
But you can't cast aspersions on the mental health of somebody who's spoken of their mental illness. You wouldn't do it to an amputee, so why would you do it to somebody who was mentally ill?
I had no idea he was mentally ill.
That's all I wanted you to say, Ken.
Yeah. No, I never heard it, frankly.
Oh, all right.
So, there we go.
So, your qualifications to do the job?
My qualification to do the job is that I spent 8 years as a cancer research technician after I left school. I was trained to find the facts. And everyone's got opinions about Trident, great moral debates about killing people and all of that. Simple fact we've got to find out, is this the best use of our money for our military at a time when we're under threat from another terrorist attack in London, like the Parisians have just seen? Is that a real value for money or not? And there are rumours going around the government's about to announce the cost of buying these is going to go up from 20 billion to 40 billion.
I'm going to persist with the phone line, but it's not fantastic. I mean, is there any mystery as to how the review will conclude, given that you've spent most of your political life campaigning against all forms of nuclear weapon?
Yeah, well, nuclear, we know from right back in the 1980s, if we had a nuclear war, 90% of all life would be wiped out on the planet. Remember then people talked about mutual assured destruction. And it's fine. If you're Russia and America, you can have, got enough weapons to have a full nuclear war. But we, like the French, have got a small nuclear fleet. It didn't stop the Argentinians invading the Falklands. And it hasn't stopped ISIS from doing these terrible crimes in Paris. I think the money would be better spent on building up our military. We've now got the smallest...
So the review's over, is it, Ken?
No, that's what I think. We're going to start looking at the facts,
right?
Not opinions. We'll get lots of stuff from military people, from people in C&D, giving us the facts. Then we can come forward and say, well, is this a useful way of spending 20 billion or perhaps 40 billion, or would it be better spent on building our military, which I think is much better in providing a front line of defence than military weapons.
And what sort of timescale can we expect? When will you be delivering the review's conclusions?
This will be months, well into the middle of next year, I imagine.
I'm hearing that Maria Eagle is unimpressed by your appointment. Would you like to say a few words to put her...
I mean, Maria Eagle first invited...
The Shadow Defence Secretary, for the avoidance of doubt.
I think she was 21 when she first invited me to come and talk to her student Labour club out in Oxford back in 1981. We've been friends and good friends right the way through these last 35 years. We'll have no trouble working together.
Would you like to apologise to Kevin Jones, Ken?
I mean, if he apologises for criticising my ability to do this job, that's fine.
No, but you have control over your professional capacities. He has no control over his mental health.
If he wants to apologise, that's fine.
No, Ken, just say sorry to the man. He suffers from clinical depression, and you've cast aspersions on his psychiatric health. It's a really bad look.
He was rude about me. I was rude back to him. He needs to get over it.
Would you have said the same things about him needing psychiatric help and being very obviously disturbed and depressed if you knew that he actually was a sufferer from clinical depression?
Of course I wouldn't have done.
Well, there you go.
Cheers.
Next word is sorry, I think. No?
Don't wait for it. I mean, once he apologises for criticising my appointment, I might be nice to him. But until then, got to live with it.
Ken Livingstone back on the airwaves on Saturday. Sorry seems to be the hardest word. And he is now conducting a review into what our nuclear weapons policy should be.
James O'Brien, weekdays 10 till 1 on LBC.
25 minutes to 12 is the time, and I have a horrible feeling that Ken Livingstone may have just committed a form of political self-harm, and I use that word advisedly, given that we're having a conversation against a backdrop of mental health issues. If you weren't listening just before the news, the former Mayor of London and my colleague here at LBC has been very roundly criticised for suggesting that a former defence minister, a current shadow defence minister who suffered with depression might need some psychiatric help. Ken Livingstone told me a few moments ago that he didn't even know who Kevin Jones was previously, and therefore could hardly be expected to know that he'd suffered from mental illness. This not really mitigating comments such as, I think he might need some psychiatric help. He's obviously very depressed and disturbed. He should pop off and see his GP before he makes these offensive comments. And I gave Ken Livingstone the opportunity to apologise, and indeed, I don't know whether it was unprofessional of me to do so. I told him that I really felt he should do so, and he chose not to, insisting instead that Mr. Jones, who is a sufferer from an illness, should apologise first for questioning Mr. Livingstone's professional qualifications to co-chair the Labour Party's defence review. One never knows quite which way to turn when something that unfolds on your own programme ends up setting a small part of the news agenda outside of this studio, but I'm receiving reports in one ear that the Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn has already issued a statement insisting that Ken Livingstone apologise for these comments. I guess having given him the first opportunity to do so, we should perhaps try and give him another. But I'm just waiting for the words of that statement from Jeremy Corbyn to be handed to me, or is Theo Usherwood going to read them to us?
I have them right here, James. A spokesperson for Jeremy Corbyn said, Jeremy is incredibly concerned that people with mental health problems shouldn't be stigmatised. He has worked with Kevin in the past on this issue and is impressed by his bravery in speaking out on his own mental health issues. Ken should apologise to him straight away.
You heard him declining to do so a few moments ago.
I did.
It's going to sound odd now when he does, having made it absolutely clear that he doesn't want to.
I think we're making every effort to get back to Ken Livingstone now. And of course, Jeremy Corbyn has campaigned vociferously on mental health issues. In fact, he missed the Andrew Marr show the weekend after he was elected Labour leader so that he could attend an event in his constituency about campaigning for mental health issues. So this is something close to the Labour leader's heart, but it does... Ken seems to have touched he's touched a nerve in the Labour Party, and it kind of symbolises, if you like, the split within the party. And of course,
split's an inadequate word now. It's a schism.
Schism,
isn't it? I mean, it's reaching utterly unfixable proportions.
And it's going to be very interesting to see exactly what happens at Prime Minister's questions later, because of course we saw yesterday, just on the issue of Syria, Labour MPs openly teeing up the Prime Minister to hit one straight at Jeremy Corbyn, and it'll be interesting to see whether Labour MPs now on this particular issue go with the same tactic again at Prime Minister's questions.
Do you think Cameron will bring this up? He can't. Well, he can in a sort of aside, can't he? He can if he gets an opportunity to use it to bat back something that Jeremy Corbyn says. You've just appointed someone to chair your
I'm sure it will come up. I don't know if it will come up in the direct exchanges. I don't know. It depends how quickly their teams are moving now. I don't know if it will come up in the direct exchanges between Jeremy Corbyn and David Cameron. But I'm going to keep right across PMQs because I suspect it will come up in the questions from the backbench MPs when they have a chance to put their questions to the Prime Minister.
And there will be, in fact, glancing at my inbox, there already are accusations that this is somehow manufactured outrage, and there will be people keen to cause Mr Corbyn and indeed Mr Livingstone political harm, professional harm. How do you, as a political editor, distinguish between the manufactured outrage that is typical of modern politics and the genuine outrage that accompanies anything that appears to undermine or malign mental illness?
The problem is Jeremy Corbyn at the very beginning set himself up as being above the fray. He introduced this new type of politics, and then he has his czar on his reviewer on defence policy, specifically Trident, coming out with this very personal, very personal attack against Kevin Jones. I was in the chamber when I was in the House of Commons press gallery when Kevin Jones gave that debate, when he gave that speech about his own mental health issues. And he stood there, and it was my boss at the time turned to me and said, I don't think there's much going on here. It was just a backbench business debate on mental health issues. And he stood there, and he came to the end of his speech, and he stood up, and you felt something was just about to happen.
Yes.
And he took off his glasses, and he put down his papers, and he was the torment of whether he was going to speak publicly about this particular issue. And he said, in his mind, something obviously clicked, and he said he was going to talk about it. And he spoke in this very, very moving way about his own personal battles with depression. And
I have a couple of quotes here, actually, Theo. In 1996, he revealed, I suffered from quite a deep depression related to work issues and other things going on in my life at that moment. Like a lot of men, you try and deal with it yourself. You don't talk to people. I just hope you realise what I'm saying is very difficult right now. And that's the speech you were listening to.
Yeah, and it opened the chamber, the House of Commons chamber in those moments there's a sort of electricity that runs through it, and it sounds pious to say it, but it's true that when people give those very, very personal speeches that go beyond, that transcend the usual political knockabout that you see, it's something to behold, actually. And interestingly, that speech was followed up by a speech from the Broxbourne MP, the Tory MP Charles Walker, touted as a future speaker, who gave a very in-depth speech, very detailed speech about his battle with obsessive compulsive disorder, and how he tried to, it affected him, as I remember, it was quite a long time ago, how it affected him on family holidays, and how his mind could be completely taken over by compulsions to do certain things. And that was interesting, that these are very real problems. And Ken Livingstone, with that, you asked him to apologise, didn't you, James? And he went, as if it's sort of knockabout. I'll only apologise if he apologises to me first. And then you said, so you're going to say sorry? And he just sort of said, huh.
Well, in a way, the points that Kevin Jones made in his speech about people's failure to properly understand the profundity of conditions like his, you could, if you were his spin doctor, perhaps argue that Ken Livingstone was demonstrating, albeit unpleasantly and in a rather insensitive fashion, precisely the sort of battles that Kevin Jones has described in the past.
But that shouldn't be an acolyte of Jeremy Corbyn, should it? It doesn't speak. What does it say about Jeremy Corbyn, the man who said, well, let's campaign for mental health issues, let's do away with the old politics, the nasty politics, let's introduce a kind of politics. And then you have somebody turn around and say, well, when it comes to mental health issues, what was the phrase that seems to be causing a huge amount of consternation on my Twitter feed?
Yes.
Was get over it.
Yes.
How many times are people with depression told to just, get over it?
Pull your socks up. Theo Usherwood, LBC's political editor. Many thanks indeed. The second, just give me a moment, because this isn't really a normal radio show, is it? The way we talk to each other every day. I really enjoyed listening to my much younger colleagues, Theo and Charlotte earlier, Charlotte Wright, who's been reporting from Paris all week, about sort of insights into how they do their job. Theo remembering being in the chamber for that speech by Kevin Jones, and that was in 2012, and Charlotte speaking earlier about the BBC journalist who appeared to shed a tear while reporting from Paris in the aftermath of those terrible atrocities. I don't want anybody getting ideas above their station, but I think we should do this sort of thing more often. It's coming up to 11:45. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I think what we'll do now is ask you what you think about that Ken Livingstone scenario. You're perfectly entitled to tell me that it's manufactured outrage. Let me tell you, before we open up the phone lines, and we'll continue to take a few calls, there's a heck of a lot of people waiting on the issue of military action further military action in Syria. I don't imagine, possibly Ken Livingstone accepted, I don't imagine there's anybody listening to this programme at the moment who hasn't been touched in at least some way by real mental illness, whether it's a family member or a friend or indeed you yourself who has suffered, or a colleague perhaps. And it is absolutely the case that conversations need to be had, and that old-fashioned notion of it being a sort of exaggerated bad mood needs to be roundly exploded. We spoke to a young man called James Rhodes, a virtuoso pianist and brilliant communicator, about his struggles with mental illness on this programme, and an astonishing number of you got in touch with me to say how refreshing it was to hear the conversation being held. So I promise you that my discomfort is not manufactured. I like Ken Livingstone as a colleague and as not great mates, but we've certainly broken bread outside a radio studio in the past, and I think that was an appalling lapse on his part, to be presented with evidence that a person he's been very rude about, the mental health he's been rude about, depression and disturbed are the words he used, and then to be given an opportunity to say sorry, just to say sorry, look, I had no idea he suffered from depression. Of course, I never would have made any form of reference to it if I had, and I am sorry. And he didn't do it. But that's me speaking. I never do a phone-in based upon the question of how big a deal do you think this is, but I'm instead just going to ask you what you feel about what you heard. And you'll have been the first people in the country to hear that, by the way. They'll be writing about it already, but you'll be the first people in the country to hear it. So why don't you be the first people in the country to tell me what you think of it? And you could be saying it's a storm in a teacup, or you could be saying, oh, the silly old sausage, what was he thinking of? 0345 6060 973, or you could be saying something completely different, of course. It is one of the last taboos, really, mental health. It's the funniest thing in the world, in a way. Funny, peculiar, not funny, ha-ha, and that we have absolutely no struggle whatsoever understanding physical weakness. But mental weakness still eludes most of us. I think it's because until you actually experience it, you just presume it is a variation upon something you have already experienced. So, well, I've had bad days. I can pull my, I know what it's like just to look myself in the eye in the mirror and say, come on, you can't do it. That's not what depression is like. And that's why I fear that just in that slightly glib refusal to apologise to Kevin Jones, Ken Livingstone, the former Mayor of London, who was not previously aware of Mr Jones's illness when he described him as clearly being very depressed and disturbed, for criticising Ken Livingstone's suitability to chair the Labour Party's Defence Review. To me, as someone who's learnt a lot more than I ever wanted to know about depression and mental illness over the last couple of years, due to a couple of very, very close friends who've suffered quite horribly, I think that was really poor. But I want to know what you think, and you can tell me on 0345 6060 973. Claire is in Bar Hill in southwest Scotland. Hello, Claire. What would you like to say?
Hi, good morning.
Hi, Claire.
I'd never phoned a radio show before, but I was listening this morning and I was absolutely incensed, not only by Ken Livingstone's comments, but also by his abject refusal, in my opinion, to apologise. I am someone who suffers from depression. I'm on medication and have been for a number of years. And I think what Ken Livingstone has shown is the ignorance that people show to an illness that is invisible. And his kind of catch-all that, I didn't know that he was suffering from depression, is neither here nor there. I mean, it didn't make any difference whether he knew or not. The very fact that he felt able to say what he said as a kind of childish get at someone he doesn't agree with, to me signifies someone who really, really needs to be educated.
Perhaps by Jeremy Corbyn. Who, of course, Theo Usherwood reminded us a few moments ago, has a proud track record on the issues that you've just been describing.
Yeah, well, absolutely. But I think what Jeremy Corbyn himself, the problem he's got, amongst many, and I'm a Labour Party member and a supporter of Jeremy Corbyn, is that this ignorance is so
I'm glad. I'm just sorry to interrupt you. I'm glad you've established that, because listen. I'm big enough and ugly enough to deal with it. But there are quite a few people queuing up just to describe this as the latest example of trying to bash Corbyn's Labour Party, trying to bash anything that is associated with him. He's actually behaved impeccably, Jeremy Corbyn. He's issued an immediate demand for an apology in absolutely no uncertain terms. So I'm glad that you describe yourself thus, Claire, because it proves, I think, unless of course you're fibbing to us, it proves that you're not part of some desperate desire to malign Jeremy Corbyn and his acolytes at every turn.
Quite the opposite.
Yes.
But I do think what it underlines is that where you have someone like Jeremy Corbyn who has taken such a stance on it, and someone who I would have thought supports Corbyn in Ken Livingstone, the ignorance that he has shown today is breathtaking. And for that reason alone, I would remove him from what he's been asked to do.
Would you really? You'd go that far?
I would go that far, because I think mental health issues are only beginning to pop their head above the parapet, and I think it would be such a strong message that, you know, this is as bad as racism, as sexism, as ageism. In fact, it's worse, because often you can't admit that you have a mental illness, and so this just makes it, to a certain extent, harder when someone in the public eye belittles the illness in the way that he's done, in my opinion.
And actually, another tweeter has made a superb point, which is some of the comments he made shouldn't be made even... The fact that Kevin Jones suffers from mental illness, has spoken of his depression, isn't actually entirely relevant to the level of offence, because jokes and flippant remarks about mental health, period, are presumably something that you roundly condemn, and indeed all right-thinking people should. To say someone needs psychiatric help, to see someone is depressed and disturbed simply because you're having a disagreement with them is it's not pretty, is it?
And I think that was my first point.
Yes.
It's like, it didn't matter that the gentleman concerned had depression. It's an illness you can't see. But the fact that Ken Livingstone felt that he could actually use that as a throwaway comment, as a put down, if you like, is just obscene.
Claire, thank you very much. I'm sorry that you were prompted to phone a radio station for the first time by such a sort of personal and poignant issue. But let's try and do something a little lighter next time.
Okay.
Next time you ring in. No, thank you, Claire. Thank you very much indeed. It's 11:57. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, talking about Ken Livingstone's controversial comments regarding the former Labour Defence Minister, the Shadow Labour Defence Minister, Kevin Jones. It boils down effectively to some ill-judged comments about the mental health of Kevin Jones that Ken made without knowing that Mr. Jones has actually spoken of his own mental health problems. First caller there, Claire, and I stress this because I'm perfectly capable of looking after myself, but the suggestion that there's some sort of catalogue of criticism of all Corbyn acolytes, all Ken Livingstone acolytes is unpleasant. Let's speak to somebody who's already piled in. The witch hunt turns on Ken Livingstone, tooth by tooth, claw by claw. They are trying to defang Jeremy Corbyn. I defend Ken, writes George Galloway, himself no stranger to the LBC microphone. I'm struggling to see why you think it's a case of picking a side. Jeremy Corbyn has ordered Ken Livingstone to apologise. So you're not on Jeremy Corbyn's side, George?
I'm on Ken Livingstone's side. The whole thing is a synthetic attack on yet another of Jeremy Corbyn's circle. It's been one after the other. Seamus Milne, formerly one of the top journalists in the country, slandered as a Stalinist and a lover of terrorists. Then Andrew Fisher, suspended by the Labour Party for a joke tweet. And now Ken Livingstone. And the people who are attacking Ken Livingstone
are Jeremy Corbyn supporters, like my last caller, George, who also suffers from clinical depression and feels profoundly offended and hurt.
How was Ken Livingstone supposed to know that?
I told him.
Happens. I do know.
I told him, George, and I asked him if he wanted to apologise, and he said only if he apologises first.
Well,
did you hear the interview?
He made a gratuitous attack on a leading Labour figure whose bootlaces he's not fit to tie, without any kind of respect for the fact that Ken Livingstone represents the point of view of the majority, 60% majority, of the Labour Party members on the issue of Trident.
Jeremy Corbyn has issued a demand for him to apologise. Are you saying Jeremy Corbyn's got it wrong?
No, I'm not. I'm saying...
So you don't think he should apologise, and you don't think Jeremy Corbyn is wrong for calling
I
off?
didn't say he shouldn't apologise. I didn't say that, James. I said that this whole thing is part of a plan to defang Jeremy Corbyn tooth by tooth, claw by claw. And everyone, every discerning listener can already see that. This is one of Corbyn's right-hand men after another being picked off by people who comprehensively lost the Labour leadership election and simply can't accept it.
I'm being, I have to tell you, inundated with communications from people who describe themselves as Jeremy Corbyn supporters and speak also of their deep discomfort at the crassness and insensitivity that Ken Livingstone displayed. Not necessarily, although a lot of people are unhappy about comments referring mental illness being used as insults at all. But there's
shouldn't be.
Really?
There shouldn't be. No, nobody should question other people's sanity. It's a very poor choice of words.
Yeah, sorry, that's the point. That's the point my correspondents are making. But they go further and say when he was told of Kevin Jones's history of depression, when he was told of Kevin Jones's history of mental illness, and offered an opportunity simply to say sorry, and he was offered it in the most casual and friendly of terms, and he turned it down. George, you have to see that that's not good.
No, I would have apologised.
Well, there you go then. So you're in agreement with the people you rang in to disagree with.
No, I didn't ring in, James. You rang me.
My mistake. My apologies, George. I didn't realise.
Yeah, a very good point. You rang me to ask me
after we saw your tweet. It was the tweet you made that we were referring
you
to.
Rang me. Don't tell people I rang
I've just apologised for that, George. It was my producer that rang you. I was a bit busy presenting a radio show. We saw the tweet. We thought, let's talk to George. He'll be interesting on this. But you're telling us that Ken should have apologised.
I said I would have apologised.
Yes.
But Ken's point that the other fellow, Jones, owed him an apology for a gratuitous attack on a leading figure in the Labour Party, respected by the overwhelming majority of Labour members and, for that matter, by the great majority of Londoners, should not have been subjected to a gratuitous personal attack by Jones. He wasn't to know.
Okay, George. Okay, George Galloway. Finally, let me just read you the comments from a spokesman for Jeremy Corbyn, and you can just tell me briefly if you agree with every single word of this. Jeremy is incredibly concerned that people with mental health problems shouldn't be stigmatised. He has worked with Kevin Jones in the past on this issue and is impressed by his bravery in speaking out on his own mental health issues. Ken should apologise to him straight away.
Yeah, I'm sure he will.
Do you agree with that?
Yes, I'm sure he will.
Good.
I disagree with people using people's state of mental health in political badinage. It's not a good thing.
I think everyone except Ken can agree on that, it would seem. George, I'm grateful for your time, and I'm very grateful to you for answering the phone when we called you in response to the tweet that you sent. And I look forward to seeing you back in this chair at LBC soon. It's 12:02. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Is this a storm in a teacup, or is it actually rather more serious than even perhaps some of Ken's friends and supporters would like to acknowledge? We continue for the time being with a story that we've rather stumbled into ourselves this morning. I'm going to read you first the tweets that are effectively arguing that it's a big old fuss about nothing. Duncan Fallowell, himself an author of some repute, writes, bored stiff with fourth form politics, James. Actually, I'll read them randomly and then you can get an idea of the balance. Matthew writes, I've always had a great deal of respect for Livingstone. It was seriously diminished this morning. I'm not outraged, writes Matthew Wooler. I'm really disappointed. And then Ian, back to the notion of it being a fuss about nothing. I have to tell you, my conviction that it's not a fuss about nothing is built entirely upon my recent and unfortunate introduction to the world of mental illness. Not on my own part, although, of course, you're welcome to make jokes about me because I'm not meant... Well, I don't know if you are, actually. That's the point. You should never be referencing psychiatric disorders or mental health in the context of trying to land a punch on somebody. Ian, however, writes, why do you guys give publicity fuel to this pointless and futile has-been? I see, it's Ken Livingstone you're attacking rather than the story. And I'm not sure that anyone would want support like this, Aussie, but I'll read it out anyway. I'm with Ken on this. You shouldn't go around slapping faces if you don't like your face slapped, especially if your face is sore. Your thoughts? I'm not asking, is this a big deal? but in a way I am. I'm asking what you think about this issue, what your reaction is to this story, the triangle, if you will, of Kevin Jones, Shadow Defence Minister, Jeremy Corbyn, Labour Party leader, Ken Livingstone, close ally of Corbyn and right-hand former mayor of London, also a colleague of mine, someone I've always liked, but people I like do things I don't like all the time. It's not exactly news. Today, however, it is. 9 minutes after 12. What's your thoughts? Pip's in Hertfordshire. Pip, what would you like to say?
Hello, James.
Hi, Pip.
It's actually quite scary phoning you because you're so lethally eloquent. But I am going to try.
Well, that's a good way to make sure I soften things up.
Any tactic. Anyway, I am going to try and find a way to defend Ken. It is unacceptable, and I know there isn't any decency and sense of fair play anymore in modern politics. But we are all becoming heartily depressed by this bickering and vicious infighting. And somebody quite rightly said it's not acceptable to make such personal attacks on a fellow colleague when, and then becoming like a bit of a bandage dangler and say, oh, I'm depressed, me.
Whoa, Pip, I'm not going to be lethally eloquent, I promise, but that's not what happened here. It's a man who spoke in 2012 with great difficulty and reluctance about the stigma and the horror of depression and mental illness, and then woke up this morning to find that having criticised the appointment of Ken Livingstone to a job by Jeremy Corbyn, he's being told he needs psychiatric help and is obviously very depressed and disturbed. I can share a lot of your worries about the sort of hatchet jobs that are being prepared and the curious Corbyn antipathy that's been engendered. I'm not impressed by him personally, but I'm perfectly respectful of people who are. You can't conflate that with this. This is not evidence of a witch hunt. This is outrage at an appalling misjudgment.
Outrage is a really big word. And
disappointment then, disgust, distress.
Well, it's just a very shabby little affair. And was I disappointed with Ken's on-the-spot reaction? Yeah, honestly, as a fan of Ken, I was a little bit. But this guy has taken abuse for years, and frankly, it's just not good enough anymore. And frankly, I know you don't sort of have much opinion of people who, like myself, who are newly discovered Jeremy Corbyn's given a lot of us a bit of hope, something different, and I just hate the way the press, the Twitterati...
Yes, I think you were right yesterday. I mean, for me yesterday, the comments about shoot to kill, it was more the absence of clarity that I found depressing and distressing. We probably went a little bit too far on the programme in suggesting that there was something dangerous or insecure about what he'd said. But if you're going to be a leader, you have to have clarity. The problem, just to digress briefly, the problem Corbyn has is that he's only been preaching to the choir for the last 30 years. He's not used to preaching to the sceptics or the agnostics or the atheists, and he needs to learn to do that. He needs the clarity so that there's no room to say, well, hang on a minute, shoot to kill, me. And today he's actually behaved well. He should emerge from this with credit. Straight in, apologise, do it now. But you heard Ken, and he sounded very childish.
Yeah, and it's hard to be told to apologise. And actually, last night I was speaking to your colleague Ian, and I agree. I wish
you've been seeing other presenters.
Yeah, sorry.
I can't believe it. It's outrageous.
And I agree. And finally, when he does actually come out and react, it's actually to clip the wings of somebody who actually is essentially a decent person, and I'm just sorry that this whole silly affair has been blown up. And
well, yes, I can see why you think it's being blown up, and you can probably tell from the sort of heavy-hearted timbre of my voice at the moment that I worry about it being blown up unjustifiably. But my personal position, and that is really where most of our conversations start, before, as I've just proved with the conversation about yesterday, I get disabused of my original position, or I get persuaded I was wrong. It's my closeness to the issue. It's people I know and love who've suffered from depression and mental illness that make me think what he said and what he did, just at that end refusal to apologise, was more than something being blown up out of all proportion, Pip. I think it's still quite proportionate, this response. Have I bored her into submission? I think I probably have. It's 12:13 is the time, Pip. I look forward to the next time, but I'm going to start getting strict about people who see other presenters behind my back. Charles is in Herefordshire. Charles, what would you like to say?
Hello, James. I think I agree that the childishness is absolutely amazing on Ken's part. If you can imagine, if your radio station was open somewhere and some primary school kids were listening, it'd be, see, Ken, Ken said that he needs to apologise first. It's pathetic. But the only thing is the difference between saying sorry and actually being sorry. It's quite obvious that he isn't sorry. It's appalling. And the other point...
Yeah, that's a really good point now, because even if he says sorry now, no one's going to believe that he is sorry because he was so adamant about having nothing to say sorry for in the first place.
It's politics in humanity, and it doesn't mix, does it? It really doesn't mix. The other thing I wanted to say was that, you see, hearing you about the journalist who expressed emotion when he saw what he saw, and Nick very much this morning was, that this is wrong, he can't have that. You know that time there was a famous piece of footage with the an airship.
This isn't open season on my LBC colleagues, Charles.
Oh no! I love him to death. I've met him a couple of times.
That's all right then. Me too.
I've met all expanse of him. He's a very impressive guy.
There's a lot to like.
Yeah, but no, that thing, the airship that came down and crashed.
The Hindenburg.
What do we? That's it, the Hindenburg. So we now teach kids, look, there's a whoosh presenting it. Don't be like him.
No, mate, you heard mine. That's why do you think we spoke to Charlotte Wright about it? It was just in order to recognise the fact that there's many different... I'm a lot closer to you on this. That astonishing intervention by the commentator watching the explosion on the airship when he said, "Oh, the humanity," and you can't convey, can you, Charles, unless you've actually watched the footage, listened to the words. You can't convey what was carried beyond the mere syllables of those words. Oh, the humanity! It was. I mean, it tore your heart out, that commentary. And there's nothing wrong with that occasionally, and I think that was the point Charlotte Wright made very well earlier today. But just for the avoidance of doubt, I don't really want this programme ever to become a sort of mopping up exercise for things that beloved and esteemed friends and colleagues may have unfolded on their shows. It's great, but we got enough. We've started our own stories without having to necessarily... Also, I'm uncomfortable. If someone slags me off on someone else's show, then I'm not there to defend myself. So I'm sure nobody ever allows that to happen. 22 minutes after 12 is the time. A couple of texts, and then we're going to speak to the other key player in this unfolding saga story. Both sides need to apologise, says Brendan, but Ken wasn't belittling anybody's mental health. He said he'd never have said it if he knew, but he's only human. If someone slagged me off, it'd probably take me a while to admit I'd been wrong. And I'm disappointed with Corbyn. He should have issued that order to Ken to apologise in private first. And then Brendan adds, I'm not sure why. Anyway, big up yourself in it. This from Abby in Surrey. Dear James, as a fan of Ken Livingstone since the late 70s, I think he should have immediately said sorry for what he said, even though he was not aware of Kevin Jones's medical history. Nip it in the bud instead of giving the press something to get their teeth into. However, I still think it's a storm in a teacup with the media making a mountain out of a molehill as usual. I promise you it's not. I promise you that anything that dilutes or discriminates against or normalises mockery of mental health issues is not a storm in a teacup. And I think, I've made it pretty clear why I believe that. I suspect that Kevin Jones, who joins me on the line now, has no difficulty understanding that position. He is, of course, the Labour MP for North Durham and the Shadow Minister for the Armed Forces. Kevin, just if you would address first people suggesting that there's nothing to see here and everyone should just move along.
Well, myself, and I've got to say, including Jeremy Corbyn in Parliament, have worked hard to try and address the stigma around mental illness. And I think Ken Livingstone's comments just show that he's reinforcing that. You can have political disagreements, which clearly we do, but then to use mental illness as a way of attacking when you're somebody you disagree with politically, they're tactics that should be in the dark ages, not in the modern politics we have today. The people I feel sorry for are the thousands of people who are suffering from mental illness or family members who will be appalled by these comments.
And we've heard from some of them already. He insisted to me earlier, I mean, I don't know if you won't have heard, I'm sure you've got more important things to do, but he told us, that he'd never really heard of you before, so couldn't really be expected to have heard of your own tribulations.
No, but that's complete irrelevance whether or not.
Well, it's not. Forgive me. It's not completely irrelevant. It's a slightly different offence if he didn't know that you'd suffered. Only slightly, perhaps, but it's still different.
Well, slightly, but the main thing is you should not use, mental illness and the language you used as a tool to attack your political opponents, irrespective of whether you know somebody suffering from mental illness or not. His comments are completely offensive, I think, to many thousands of people. And I think Jeremy said he should apologise to me. What he really needs to do is apologise to tens of thousands of people, both in the Labour Party and outside, who are affected by mental illness on a day-to-day basis.
Indeed. Interesting to hear you describe political opponents. You're supposed to be on the same team.
Well, no, we disagree politically on issues, which is both the case in the Conservative Party. There are people who have different views, and also people in the Labour Party have different views. But you should never use mental illness in the gratuitously offensive way he did to attack somebody you disagree with.
Just to step away from the, if you will, the ramifications of your original intervention and return to your reasons for questioning his suitability for the job. You were a defence minister in Gordon Brown's government, of course, and Ken Livingstone's track record on defence was called into question by you. That's how all this started. Why are you unhappy with his appointment as the co-chair of Labour's Defence Review?
Well, it is a defence review, and I think what I said was I wasn't aware of his expertise in defence. Now, he said that he found that very offensive. But, well, that's for him to judge. Then to use the language he used against me and against other people, then I think is completely unwarranted.
I asked him to apologise, and he said you have to say sorry first. If you wanted to, as a colleague and an opponent, if you wanted to put an arm around his shoulder and explain to him why that is such an ill-judged intervention, what would you say?
Well, I think that shows that those type of comments, I think, in the political schoolyard rather than actual serious politics. I mean, if he doesn't realise the offence he's caused, I have a tough skin.
Sure.
But if he doesn't realise that the offence is caused to thousands of ordinary people in this country, then I think he does need some help in terms of understanding mental illness. I've got to say, Jeremy Corbyn definitely understands the offence which will have been caused today, because he's campaigned, along with myself and others, to raise that stigma.
Indeed, it's a point made by his official spokesperson. So finally, I would ask you whether you worry, and this is not, irrespective of your personal involvement in today's events, do you worry that this will do collateral damage to Mr. Corbyn, this whole brouhaha? I would not question Jeremy's commitment to campaign on mental health. He's spoken in debates, I've spoken at meetings with him, and he is passionate about it. He must be disappointed, I think, as most people are, that we still have someone like Ken Livingstone who can use such language, which is no place at all in modern politics, and actually put back the work that both Jeremy High and many thousand other people have been doing to try and raise the stigma of mental illness. In fact, it occurs to me you have a colleague, don't you, who is the first ever Shadow Minister for Mental Health, appointed by Jeremy Corbyn.
Well, that shows that Jeremy takes this issue seriously. I mean, he's spoken in debates and he's taken interest when he was on the backbenches. So I know his personal commitment to this, and I say he will be appalled, I think, as many others will be, about Ken's comments.
Kevin Jones, we haven't spoken before, I don't think, so perhaps you'd allow me to say that I found the comments that you made back in 2012 incredibly brave and incredibly important.
Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. Back first, though, to Ken Livingstone's accusation, criticism of a political colleague and opponent. They're not oxymoronic, are they, those terms, especially not in the Labour Party at the moment. Suggesting that he might need some psychiatric help, Mr. Livingstone said to the Daily Mirror about Kevin Jones, after Kevin Jones, the Shadow Defence Minister, criticised Livingstone's suitability to co-chair Labour's Defence Review. I think he might need some psychiatric help. He's obviously very depressed and disturbed. Schoolyard stuff, perhaps, but when you discover that Kevin Jones actually has spoken very eloquently and very powerfully of his sufferings with depression, with mental illness in the past, it adds a whole new complexion to the comments that Ken Livingstone has declined thus far to apologise for. I'm just interested in your thoughts. Molly is in Battersea. Molly, what would you like to say?
Hi there. I'm just calling because I'm a young person. I'm 24. I've got a decade of mental health behind me. So I definitely feel like I know what I'm talking about.
Yes.
But I thought maybe you'd be interested in my 2 pence. I'll just get a little sort of spoiler alert out there that my political awareness is fairly poor. So I'm not too interested in that side of it.
Don't worry.
Just from what I've listened to this morning, I feel like it might be worth considering that having this reaction to a stupid, idiotic comment about mental health almost makes it worse for people who suffer with it. It almost alienates us further. My personal sort of philosophy on depression is to try and treat it as if it's diabetes or a broken arm. I don't want everyone jumping dramatically to my defence, making me feel like I need some humongous apology and that I should be feeling outraged. I feel like that makes me feel more separated.
That's fascinating.
I'm being made more of a spectacle in a way. And as you said earlier, you know that you don't want this to be normalised. And actually, having suffered with this for 10 years and living with the knowledge that I probably will continue to, I actually do want it to be normalised. I want people to be comfortable with mental health. I don't want this kind of dramatic reaction.
Well, isn't there a danger of contradicting yourself just ever so slightly? Because all it would have taken was for Mr. Livingstone to say it was a ridiculous comment. It was deeply unfortunate. Obviously, I shouldn't have made it. I doubly shouldn't have made it about someone who has suffered in the past. I'm really sorry. Can we all move on now? And it's his reluctance to do that I think has got under the skin of people who would historically have had great support for him in most scenarios.
Yeah, yes, definitely. I definitely agree. I think that what he said is ridiculous, and to not apologise even after having been, after he was made aware that he'd made this mistake is ridiculous. And as someone mentioned earlier, it's just playground behaviour. So I'm not in any way condoning the way that he's behaving, but the way that the media grab onto it like this big piece of meat to just tuck into, I feel does almost more damage.
Let's consider it a chipolata that we've been nibbling with perhaps with enthusiasm. And I think you've just had the final nibble, Molly, for what it's worth. Have a great day. Thank you very much for your time.